Avon Stormcloud says, Talvit. Vugin give a slight nod as I listen to Runa's explanation, acknowledging her words without interrupting. As she speaks, I can't help but notice the faint blush on her cheeks, a subtle detail that briefly draws my attention. Kate says, ready on my end, Triss.
Raya says, greetings, masters, mitresses, beasties.
Tristan Gates says, okay, everyone ready. Tristan Gates says, we have some house rules today. Considering I can't hear those in the back, please shout if you wish to ask questions. Eats looks to the man who spoke to him. Correct. Tristan Gates says, if you wish to bid. Tristan Gates says, also shout. Alan says, have you moved? Or just been busy? Tristan Gates says, this year we do it a bit different. Each slave will be presented in turn, and you can start your bidding if it appeals. Rarius shouts, may I use counterfeit coins as well? Tudahi looks at Raya and makes his classic gesture with two fingers that look like they're about to pinch, pointing them in her direction.
Omri says, welcome back, Lady Trillian.
Tristan Gates says, this year, not the highest bidder wins, but the right bidder. Eru says, how the hell do you decide that? Tristan Gates says, so keep that in mind when you start with the bidding. Rarius says, if the coin is certified by a city. Invisible coins are all counterfeit. Tristan Gates says, for the very first we have Neray.
Ruya says, how do you decide the right bidder?
Eru says, bribe the slaver, laughing out loud.
Inquiry says, what the slave wants.
Freckles says, grins. Maybe.
Eru says, princess slaves will be doing the happy dance then. Cade shouts, moves to the steps to retrieve the first slave up for auction, Neray. Leading them to the auction block, he stands to the side as the bidding commences.
Inquiry ponders this for a moment, her index finger tapping her lips. I was taught all wrong. Never knew I had a choice.
Freckles says, giggles hearing Eru.
Noxie says, slaves have a choice? Charlotte says, pardon me, I am lagging too much.
Freckles says, who decides the right bidder then?
I'm confused.
Raya says, laughs at Tudu and wiggles my fingers at him.
Eru shouts, it would help if you told us when the right bidder meant. Zandikin tugs Ivory along, slapping jeans but smiling to Shauna as he passes some of his winnings to the hold. Rarius says, the slave for sure chuckles.
Charlotte says, those who have registered.
Eru says, we are all confused.
Charlotte says, to bid.
Eru says, we were meant to register, laughing out loud.
Charlotte says, yes, notices went out 3 times.
Phoenix chuckles as he wonders if that bond might survive the North.
Ruya says, this year it was register as bidder and slave.
Rarius shouts, only bankers are allowed to bid.
Orchid says, covers her bare neck. Register.
Eru says, laughing out loud.
Freckles says, register as a bidder?
Tudu says, then they end up paying hundreds of gold coins for some fat asses. Asterisk roll his eyes. Cade shouts, moves to the steps to retrieve the first slave up for auction, Nere. Leading them to the auction block, he stands to the side as the bidding commences.
Inquiry sighs her hopes were deflated.
Tristan Gates says, you have to be registered as a bidder. Tristan Gates says, we have Nere up first. She is born a slave from the south.
Freckles says, aw, thanks.
Lucian Wildolf says, where the hell do you register? Tristan Gates says, she knows how to dance and how to serve. Nicholas says, claps. Phoenix says, will she survive the North Tristan? Rarius shouts, registers himself shouting, register me, Rarius Yuroki. Tristan Gates says, I will start bidding for her at 15 coppers. She will survive the North.
Inquiry gasps, 5 coppers.
Eru says, I want a hand vote on those who registered laughing out loud. Phoenix says, 50 coppers from Kassaw. Tristan Gates says, I hear 50 coppers from Kassaw. Torm shouts, I prefer a slave who is literate. Have any of the slaves served a scribe before or been educated enough to serve a pretentious scribe? Tristan Gates says, anyone wish to bid more than 50 coppers?
Nere did as she was instructed and got onto the stage, her head bent respectfully as she was placed there. Lifting her chin, she made sure she could be seen properly.
Yuroki says, is this auction out of character or in character?
Phoenix looks about with his hand on his axe.
Scarlet shouts, 50.
Cade shouts, there you go, a dancing slave. 15 coppers is a steal on this lovely creature. Looks to Nere, stand girl, show them that lovely body of yours. She even has all her teeth. What more could you ask for? Tristan Gates says, we have 50 coppers from Kassaw. Camelus shouts, how long is her term?
Charlotte says, it's in character, I think.
Tristan Gates says, she will be available for 3 days.
Yuroki says they use invisible coins. It seems to be out of character. Ruya says, it's in character, but you had to register beforehand. Scarlet 1 silver.
Tristan Gates says, 1 silver, we're going close to the roof of pricing. Rarius says, what a bosk shit. Kate shouts, 1 silver, girl, look at that. Hold yourself proudly, lass. You've done well. Eru looks over at the lady bidding. She seemed rich, and
Inquiry says, single master, she may just be single.
Phoenix chuckles as he hears a silver offered for 3 days, and looks away as it would take 3 full days plus a hand to get back to Kassaw. Zandikin says, single, ready to tingle, chuckles.
Scarlet, a present for a man of my city.
Tristan Gates says, going once. Tristan Gates says, going twice. Tristan Gates says, lady, you can come up and pay Paul over there 1 silver for the girl. Eru grins, looking closer. She does look well. Torm says, seemed quite expensive.
Ashka says, look at all the coin we could have won if we'd put our beast on auction for 3 days.
Zandikin says, Bonnie. Kate shouts, looks in array. Stand, girl. He leads her to the steps so she can go to her new owner. Glancing to Paul, he nods, then moves to bring up the next slave. Tristan Gates says, up next we have Sweetie.
Raya says, ponders the thought of being sold off for 3 days to some potential random person. Could be a weirdo who smells.
Tristan Gates says, Sweetie is up for auction for the duration of the fair.
Ashka wipes away a dry tear. All those dresses I could have bought. Ruya says, the fair ends tomorrow?
Alan says, chuckles.
Ashka says, Sunday is last day.
Tristan Gates says, she is a free woman from Turia. Tristan Gates says, well was. Cade shouts, takes Sweeta's arm and leads her to the auction platform, securing her there. Stand tall, ass. Let the bidders see what you have to offer them. Tristan Gates says, until she was enslaved. Tristan Gates says, she has been trained in R. Paul looks to the lady. 1 silver for the slave for a time of 3 days. Tristan Gates says, she can read, write, and also learn how to dance. Phoenix chuckles 10 coppers to have her serve at her tent. Tristan Gates says, as such we will start the bidding with 5 coppers, and I have 10 coppers.
Anthony shouts, 12 coppers.
Tristan Gates says, 12 coppers. Phoenix grins to drive the bids up. 13 coppers. Tristan Gates says, 13 coppers. Tristan Gates says, we're crawling up there. Tristan Gates says, "Come on, folks, a wonderful slave trained in R."
Anthony shouts, "Show us her tits."
Paul, as the slave moves to near, I point to my side. "Neil, girl, your new owner will be here soon."
Ruya says she's got the right curves for the north at least.
Zandikin says, "She, as especially good for tarn drops, has quite the landing." Torm glances over at Paul Spirit Weaver after hearing someone whisper about the man's penis sticking out. "What a fool," he spouts. Tristan Gates says, "We have 13 coppers. Sold." Tristan Gates says, "Phoenix, come on up to Paul and pay the 13 coppers." Zandikin says, "Hail Odin. Glory to Kassaw. Honor to Jarl Phoenix."
Sweetie says she felt the master's touch and let him lead her onto the stage. Even though she felt herself trembling with excitement, she remained completely calm. She breathed a sigh at the master's words, a "yes, master," ere she stepped with her right foot in front of her left. She arched her back, causing her breasts to gently bob up and down. She lowered her gaze as she did so, lifting her head slightly.
Phoenix laughs as he moves forward. Tristan Gates says, "You can walk over to Paul, sweetie." Avon Stormcloud says, "Least you will have somewhere soft to lay your head, Phoenix." Tristan Gates says, "Up next, Bina." Tristan Gates says, "Bina will be available for 1 week. She is skilled in boss herding." Tristan Gates says, "A fine young slave who is eager to learn and serve."
Anthony shouts, 10 coppers for the boss herder.
Tristan Gates says, 10 coppers. Tristan Gates says, "We have 10 coppers." Torm says, "Tow coppers." Camelus shouts, 15 coppers if you toss in a bosk." Eru says, "If I had registered ID be bidding." Ivar shouts, 50 copper. Eru says, "She cooks really well." Paul takes the slave by the arm and look as to the man, 13 coppers are a good deal for a slave as her. Tristan Gates says, 15 coppers if we can find a bosk. Tristan Gates says, 50 coppers. Tristan Gates says, without the bosk. Torm says, "You are all very rich Gorians." Tristan Gates says, "We're inching closer, people." Eru says, 50C if you register me now. Tristan Gates says, "A fine slave like this." Phoenix says, chuckles as he makes payment, and looks at the beast before him.
Charlotte says, there are 200 people here at this slave auction. I am so lagged.
Tristan Gates says, 50 coppers to the man over there. Points to Ivar.
Charlotte says, oops, wrong window, sorry.
Paul as the man pays for the girl. Go to your new owner slave, I say. Camilla shouts, 55 copper. Xanakin says, boss herder, means she can milk all tings, or maybe even ride cheers. Tristan Gates says, if you come up and pay Paul Ivar. Francis says, sorry to all those I've unintentionally run into here. Alan says, I don't know, but she's hot AF. Tristan Gates says, Bina, you may walk over to Paul to be collected. Cade shouts, nudges Bina to stand tall and proud as he listens to the bids, then escorts Bina to Paul and moves to bring up the next slave for auction. Tristan Gates says, all right, we have a fine treat for you all. Paul looks to the next lot and makes a mark, then nods as he makes his way up fast to pay. She is your sir. Torm says, I can visit a pagan den and enjoy the comfort of a slut for the cost of drinks. He then glances about the stage at the perceived notion of another whisper. Perhaps you are right, the auctioneer might be biased with predetermined winners. I will take your complaint to the proper HOC. Phoenix grips the arm of the bond. Come with me now, girl, he commands. Ivar starts to count out coins, his eyes straying back up to the stage, losing count and must start over again, counting them 2 at a time, phonily getting the stack on his right hand at the sum of 50 coppers. Your payment, sir. Tristan Gates walked to the side of the stage, grabbing the upper arm of the northern man, while he drags him up to the stage, keeping a firm grip. Xanakin says, cheers, Darius. Cade shouts, steps back, knowing what's coming. He's quite conflicted about this one, but he keeps his mouth shut, jaw tight, as the auction proceeds. Rhaegorn shouts. The low growl starts deep in the chest, more beast than man, vibrating through the hall like a warning none dare heed. Chains rattle as rough hands seize hold, iron biting into flesh already worn raw. The man dares to pull, dares to command, and in answer, teeth flash. A savage snap cuts the air as I lunge for his face, jaws clashing inches from his skin, a feral promise of blood and ruin. My shoulders strain, muscles coiling and surging against the chains as if they might tear free by sheer fury alone. Try it. I snarl through bared teeth, voice thick with venom. Come closer. But he drags anyway. Boots scrape against the ground as I'm hauled forward, step by unwilling step, like some captured war beast brought low. The crowd blurs into a sea of eyes watching, weighing, judging. The podium rises ahead, a place for cattle, for the broken, for those meant to kneel. Another violent jerk of the chain forces me up, metal clanking as I'm shoved into place, displayed like property. Avon Stormcloud says, his face composed, he looks up to his brother on the stage, knowing he will have issues auctioning this next offering.
Shay says, watches and smirks. Bina stepped off the stage and smiled, dipping her head respectfully. Thank you, master. She said, her case of nerves now eased some. What happens now?
Paul looks to the next lot, frowning, a bit myself. Eru scratches his face, surprised at what he says being auctioned. Tristan Gates says, for the duration of the fair, this one will be for sale. Tristan Gates says, he's from the cold north, captured and brought here to be sold. Tristan Gates says, believe it or not, he knows how to serve one. Eru says, thought those from the north would rather die than be slave. Cade shouts, moves to help Tristan secure the chains and bindings needed, and then steps back a bit, giving Tristan room. His gaze moves to the man up for auction, his features expressionless, though his eyes are as cold as the fjords of his native lands. Ray Gorn says, wouldn't want it as I would rim your glass with my ass snarls.
Bonnie shouts, you can keep that one.
Anthony shouts, show us if he knows how to kneel.
Ivar says, heel slut. Eats' interest is piqued. Oh, how interesting. He reminds me of my former business partner, though a bit less happy. Tristan Gates says, oh, he knows how to kneel.
Inquiry thrusts up her hand.
Eru says, make him kneel, where's his collar? Kaido says, I see free wearing less. He murmurs more to himself. Eru says, he looks free to me. Tristan Gates says, moves one hand on the shoulder of the boy. Alan says, looks at his chest and frowns. Tristan Gates says, you kneeling on your own, or do you need help?
Ruya looks at the stage, a bit shocked in seeing a northern man up for sale as she shakes her head softly, her coin purse closed as her fist wraps around it, a Torvaldslander. She says to Vugan softly, her eyes showing a rage in her eyes.
Eru says, he needs a collar to be slave. Wouldn't a slaver know that? Tristan Gates says, aims a kick for the back of his knees. Ray Gorn shouts. I growl low and vicious as the man's boot slams into me, driving me down hard, knees cracking against the stone. The chains snap tight with emotion, biting deep as I'm forced into a kneel meant for the broken. My head dips for a heartbeat, then slowly lifts, eyes burning up at him from beneath a lowered brow, teeth bared in a feral promise. You'll lose that leg if you try it again. I rasp, voice rough and edged like a blade dragged over bone, shoulders flexing against the iron as if daring it to fail, as if daring him to come closer. Even on my knees, the growl never fades. It deepens, coiling in my chest like something waiting to tear free. Daphne Offshadow looks shocked.
Inquiry hand moves back and forth quickly. 1 copper. She yelled, my master will love him, I am sure of it.
Raya says, just cants my head to the side, arching a brow, trying to figure out if I know that Jarl.
Tristan Gates says, moves his foot on his back to keep him down. Tristan Gates says, see, he does know how to kneel.
Freckles says, giggling.
Avon Stormcloud says, reaches out and takes his companion's hand. Halda shouts, 1 silver. Tristan Gates says, 1 silver.
Ashka pouts.
Tristan Gates says, We're starting strong.
Elena calls out as an immediate impulse. 2 silver and a nice pat on the back.
Eru says, chuckles, he is no slave, he has no collar. No northern man would be slave, he would choose death.
Freckles says, "Oh, I'm sure your master would."
Tristan Gates says, no one else? Halder shouts, here's a bid, and keeps going. 5 silver, 50 copper.
Ingrid pulls her hand down and pouts. She looked over to the one who outbid her, her eyes shooting daggers his way.
Tristan Gates says, sold for 5 silver and 50 copper. Tristan Gates says, be sure you have a strong leash ready. Tristan Gates says, come and pay Paul here and collect your slave. Eru says, a male slave bidding for a northerner who is no slave. Tristan Gates says, grabbed him by his arm and began to drag him up and over taut heat edge of the stage.
Bonnie shouts, good luck with that one.
Kaido says, Kajuralia today?
Raya says, scrunches my nose.
Eru says, simply shakes his head. The north was dead, it seems. Paul moves to help get that one down to me. Halder shouts, I shouted the bid on my owner's permission, and I got her purse. She had to take a breath of air. I hope that is okay. She crashed. Tristan Gates says, up next we have Fina. Eru says, it should not be okay, but this is no normal auction. Tristan Gates says, Fina is up for 1 week.
Fia stepped forward when her turn came, the noise of the crowd pressing in from all sides. She paused at the edge of the platform for just a breath, letting the attention settle on her before she moved. Then slowly she stepped up. She stood before the people gathered, unhurried, unshaken. Her shoulders rolled back, spine lengthening as she lifted her chin, letting the light catch along the lines of her body. Her hands rose in a practiced motion, tracing the curve of her form, guiding the eye of anyone that would look upon her. Each touch was light, deliberate, that her fingers drifted upward, then down again, slow enough to make even stillness feel like part of the performance. Her emerald eyes lifted then, full of mischief and something sharper beneath it. She didn't lower her gaze like a timid offering, she met theirs, letting it linger on one face, then another, just long enough to make it feel chosen before moving on. A faint smile would touch her lips.
Tristan Gates says, she knows how to write, cook, and read. Tristan Gates says, she is a very fine slave and looking for a home for 1 week. Alan says, wow, she's sexy too. Tristan Gates says, we will start the bidding for her at 25 coppers.
Anthony shouts, she also has nice tits, I see. 25 coppers.
Era says, laughs.
Anthony says, 26.
Alan says, see, even Anthony thinks so. Tristan Gates says, 26 coppers. Tristan Gates says, we are starting good. Anyone have more than 26 coppers? Paul blinks at the boy, then to the man. I see, boy, he is your owner's, be seerful. Camelus shouts, is she any good with a bow?
Shay says. Fia raises a brow.
Eru says, She looks like she knows how to bend a will. Tristan Gates says, considering she's good with cooking, I am sure she will know what a bow is. Eru says, I vouch for the cooking and the conversation. Tristan Gates says, a fine slave. Camillus shouts, 30 coppers. Eru says, she dances well too. Tristan Gates says, 30 coppers. Eru says, I should be selling her. Tristan Gates says, we are climbing up.
Fia laughs.
Ruiyu says, looked over his shoulder at the mistress, and then to his owner's twin, then back to the auction. Tristan Gates says, sounds like a very fine specimen and known to some of the audience. Alan says, she can play berserker too. She will even let you win if you tell her to.
Fia glances out to the crowd by me Masters fluttering her lashes.
Eru says, she can play well with others. Halder eyed the auctioneer and then retrieved Rhaegorn. He didn't say anything, but just lead him. Tristan Gates says, we have 30 going once. Tristan Gates says, going twice. Rhys says, he looks up at the block and says, runner though poses, remove her clothing. Tristan Gates says, Camillus, you may collect the girl and make your payment with Paul. Eru says, 30C? Steal. Tristan Gates says, Georges. Tristan Gates says, up next we have a boy barbarian in fact brought here from Earth. Georges promptly jumps on the stage. Yes, master. Tristan Gates says, he is educated, trained to cook, and to serve as well as bathing.
Bonnie shouts, hello beefcake alert.
Georges says, replies with baritonal voice. Tristan Gates says, he is available for 1 week.
Anthony shouts, 10 coppers.
Ruya shouts, 15 coppers.
Tristan Gates says, we have a start of 10 coppers, /. Tristan Gates says, 15 coppers. Eat says, where is playtimes?
Anthony shouts, 16 coppers.
Paul looks to the next one. That is going to be 30 coppers, sir. Tristan Gates says, 16 coppers.
Ruya shouts, 1 silver.
Tristan Gates says, 1 silver.
Anthony shouts, 1 silver, 1 copper.
Eru says, at least he almost has a collar on. Tristan Gates says, a very wanted claim. Tristan Gates says, we're inching closer, people. 1 silver and 1 copper.
Ruya says, I know George, he is a good boy.
Eru says, male slaves are selling for more than female. Georges says, inhales, kneels, spreads, keens, listening the bitters' voices.
Ashka says, supply and demand. Shrugs.
Tristan Gates says, and we have a sale for 1 silver and 1 copper. Anthony, come up to Paul and collect your slave. Paul, taking the coin, I nod and push the slave to him. She is yours, sir, I say as I mark it on my list. Camillus says, digs into his coin belt and pulls out 30 copper and pays Paul. Eru says, must be.
Ruya says, "Dang, I missed that bid," laughing out loud.
Iskander says, "Was that another man that both the thrall Shesh?" Camillus nods, waving for her to follow. There is more bidding to be done. Tristan Gates says, "We have Safi."
Safi shouts. She hears her name and looks around before it dawns on her to go to the stage. She dashes up the steps, almost falling before tossing the blanket down and waving at everyone in the crowd. She was nervous at all the eyes on her, but she smiled anyway. "Tell master and mistress, I am Safi. Let trade lots of shinny circles," she shouts before spinning around, showing off as she was told she needed to do when on stage. "I am good at cleaning, playing music, dancing, hiding and training racing volos." She held up her fingers, counting it off as she spoke in her stilted way. She smiled. "My special skill is I can eat anything and not get sick. Granted, I might gag, but I won't be sick." Elena says, "Don't judge, you don't know if he's a gift or something, or maybe he just needs his backyard redone." Smirks.
Tristan Gates says, "This girl sells herself." Tristan Gates says, "She can eat anything." Tristan Gates says, "Think about that, good man." Era says, laughs.
Anthony says, "Heel boy, I am not done with this auction."
Paul sees the boy move to me. I nod, then look to the man for the coin. "He is your for the week, sir."
Safi shouts, as she spins about and bends over, looking though her legs. "By me, master," she says loudly, giggling and happy to be here.
Tristan Gates says, "We start our bid at 25 coppers." George nods to Paul and follow his new elegant owner. Tristan Gates says, "Such a fine specimen." Tristan Gates says, 25 coppers, and she will be yours for the time of the fair." Halder whistles saucily. Tristan Gates says, grins to Halder.
Safi wiggles on the stage, making little happy sounds.
Tristan Gates says, "She is good in cleaning, dancing, and playing music." Tristan Gates says, "Created by the House of Cernus."
Ruya shouts, "Well, if no one else will, 25 coppers."
Eru says, "She was playing music earlier." Tristan Gates says, "Runa, 25 coppers." Halder distorts his voice on purpose. How many fingers can she fit in her mouth? Woo-boo. Tristan Gates says, "Going once." Tristan Gates says, "Going twice." Tristan Gates says, "You may collect your slave for 25 coppers." Tristan Gates says, "Head over to Paul."
Safi, she smiles and waves at them all.
Emeralina says, "Some guy named Torm said I should come here to investigate if the auctions are rigged."
Kate shouts, leads Safi to Paul, then moves to collect the next slave, leading them to the block. Tristan Gates says, Melina. Tristan Gates says, we move on to Daddy. Eru says, you're selling your father. Tristan Gates says, not father, Daddy. Kate shouts, looks for Melina. Not finding her, bring Daddy to the block. Paul takes the coin for the girl and pushes the slave to the lady.
Safishi moves over to Runa and smiles, waving Tau mistress.
Tristan Gates says, Daddy here is born in R. She has, well. Tristan Gates says, she can. Tristan Gates says, Eru says, she doesn't look like a daddy either. Tristan Gates says, scratches his head. Tristan Gates says, she's pretty.
Anthony shouts. This one has nice cheeks on her face, 2 coppers.
Tristan Gates says, 2 coppers, we have a starting bid.
Shay says, laughs.
Daddy bows. Tristan Gates says, she is very fine looking.
Ruya smiles at the girl and nods her head to her, follow me. If I can through the lag, that is.
Tristan Gates says, and she will be available for not 1 week. Tristan Gates says, not 2 weeks. Tristan Gates says, but a whole month. Dry says, Bank of Gore is now open, selling loans of up to 89,000 G with 10,000% interest. Tristan Gates says, we have brought her all the way from R. Eru says, why is she glittering? Tristan Gates says, going once, going twice. Tristan Gates says, and sold to Anthony for 2 coppers. Tristan Gates says, you can collect your slave by Paul.
Anthony says, what in the priest king's name I won?
Tristan Gates says, up next we have Molly. Alan says, laughs. I know HD feeling. Cade shouts, escorts the slave to Paul, and walks to the next girl, Molly. Come along, lass, he says, taking her arm and leading her to the block. Alan says, is that the Molly I know or a different one? Paul looks to the slave, to Copper Sir. Tristan Gates says, Molly is looking for permanent ownership.
Molly shouts, is yanked from her cage by strong arms, dragged toward the auction block. No, no, you can't do this. Why doesn't anyone help me?
Tristan Gates says, she is a barbarian. Tristan Gates says, recently brought over.
Anthony says, grabs her by the cheeks, yanking her along with him. For 2 coppers?
Tristan Gates says, brand new. Tristan Gates says, a fine-looking slave. Eru says, pay us to take her then.
Molly glares at the guard forcing her ahead of him, and she struggles and tries to pull away. Get your damned hands off me. I am not a slave. I'm a woman, or from Earth, from New Jersey. This is insane.
Alan says, how much will it cost for training? Tristan Gates says, I will train her for 5 gold. Eru says, 5 gold. Paul looks up almost interested in this one myself. Tristan Gates says, prime slave house. Eru says, keep her laughing out loud. Darius says, her new owner will need to remind her what her mouth is for, I see. Kate shouts, shoot, slut. Consider yourself lucky to be up here. On display for all to see your loveliness. You'll find a good owner, no doubt. He swats the girl's backside as he makes sure the bonds are secure. Tristan Gates says, I will start the bidding at 5 coppers. Dry says, selling a slave, known as Rimabun. She knows how to make a wicked curry. Any interested? Kate shouts, chuckles at Paul's comment.
Emeralina says, do the collar and bracelets come with the girl?
Eru says, good question.
Honey says, I will remove all of your teeth and wear them as a crown.
Halder shouts, oh, she speaks no gibberish, 30 copper. Tristan Gates says, 30 coppers. Dry says, chew. Tristan Gates says, we have a start of 30 coppers.
Molly suddenly looks out over the huge crowd spread out in front of her. Her eyes look terrified. Then she remembers she is supposed to say something. She looks at you. Her eyes are pleading, her voice begging. Buy me, master. Please. Please, mistress, or please buy me.
Tristan Gates says, sold for 30 coppers. Eats says, for 5 gold you better be sending her to barbarian lands and getting her an education that makes her extremely useful to a high caste man. Tristan Gates says, come up to Paul to collect your slave.
Molly hears the auctioneer close the bidding. Ooh, no. No, no, no. Don't sell me to him. Sell me to that cute guy over there instead. He as she points and laughs.
Alan says, I thought you AHD to count to 3 before slay. Cade shouts, here's the words, then says, that's it, lass, 30 coppers. Come along. He escorts her to Paul for her new owner to take possession. Tristan Gates says, then we have the last one today.
Molly looks for a direction to argue, but only sees spears and swords.
Eru says, it will cost more than her price just to feed her into a more interesting shape. Tristan Gates says, thought. Alan says, well, so much for my bid. Halder shouts, ha, she's lucky I'm bidding on a Free's behalf. If they were there in person. Eru says, I can't believe you're allowed to bid. Kate shouts, brings Thought to the platform, securing her to the block. Come along, lass. Alan says, well, apparently am not, as there was no count. Eru says, not you, the slave boy. Paul looks to the boy once more, as Tristan side your owner can always pay one of us to train the girl.
Ashka says, it's like sending your slave to the store. They're your proxy. He doesn't own. He's just making payment.
Eru says, I need to get out more.
Ashka says, perhaps.
Eru says, and get a slave laughing out loud.
Ashka says, laughing out loud.
Alan says, isn't really an auction if bidding doesn't actually happen. Halder says, I can't believe it as well. I just wanted to ogle and make saucy comments. I was told to bid for them, so I did. Eru says, well, you're following orders, so my ire isn't at you anyway.
Ashka says, may I suggest using the comment card the fair gave out and speak to this? Perhaps more time for bids, etc.?
Halda grinned at Paul and took Molly. Oh, I'll let them know if they need, but they're good with slaves. Paul takes the coin from him, then pushed the slave to the boy.
Ruya says, I think having to register to bid is the biggest issue.
Tristan Gates says, we have the next one up, this fine girl.
Molly glances up at the man, then lowers her eyes. They are telling me that you own me now, and that I have to be good, or else master. She peeks back up. Can't you just give me my clothes back and let me go?
Ruya says, I didn't even know that till I went to the first auction.
Freckles says, turns to Inquiry. I have to go. I was hoping that Masters would be auctioned off. Winking. Emeralina says, how does that work?
Tristan Gates says, she's from R.
Inquiry snickers.
Tristan Gates says, and wishes to be up for 1 month. Cade shouts, drags the girl to the block, securing her there. You're all over the place, lass. Come along, straighten those shoulders. Show these bidders you're worth every copper they bid. Tristan Gates says, she is literate. Eris says, 1 month? Might as well own her fully.
Ashka says, well, I am sure the Ankara team would appreciate hearing from you all. It will help shape the next year.
Halder grabbed Molly's wrist. Oh, from your tone. I know you like it rough. Let's go now. I shall bring you home. Tristan Gates says, born in the slave house of Portus. Tristan Gates says, she is as artistic. Tristan Gates says, and... Tristan Gates says, looks down to his paper, then to the girl and sighs. Eru says, she likes ropes. Tristan Gates says, really?
Thought starts snickering.
Tristan Gates says, he looks back over. Tristan Gates says, she gives great blowjobs.
Emeralina says, rolls her eyes.
Tristan Gates says, so if you wish a girl who could double as a vacuum.
Orchid says, lifts from her knees, rubbing her forehead.
Honey shouts, I'd like a second opinion.
Tristan Gates says, this is your chance one. Eris says, laughs.
Alyssa looks appalled. Ruya laughs at the auctioneer's words.
Pink licks her lips and nudges the mistress nearest.
Ivar says, seems an excellent trait to point out. Tristan Gates says, truly, she'll suck the furs right up your.
Raya says, giggles.
Eris squints at the girl's mouth. Might make up for bypassing the chest. Tristan Gates says, come on people, we start at 25 coppers. Tristan Gates says, for little Miss Sucky here. Cade shouts, throws back his head laughing. There you go, folks, world-class blowjobs. That should jump this bidding up to at least a silver.
Thought stares at the auctioneer, enjoying every second of it.
Alyssa murmurs to Pinks, is she a vacuum cleaner? I need one of those.
Tristan Gates says, 25 coppers while we forget all her other skills. Eru says, does her mouth come physician checked first? Charles says, rename her to Dyson.
Alyssa says, I am not volunteering.
Eris says, laughs. Tristan Gates says, well, you know, we tried.
Pinks shakes her head and whispers, no mistress, it's not how that works. It's kind of how well. It would make you blush to hear the details, she added as she quietly dug her teeth into her lower lip.
Tristan Gates says, but she offered a blowjob right away and he assessed she was fine. Tristan Gates says, but I wasn't sure he was speaking health-wise.
Thought laughs and bows her head, leaping off the stage.
Very says, you should give me all your money.
Alyssa thinks beautiful thoughts.
Ivar shouts, 25 copper.
Thought says, be right back.
Tristan Gates says, 25 coppers. Tristan Gates says, we have 25 coppers. Eru says, that man is greedy, he's renting 2 girls. 1 for each end? Tristan Gates says, going once. Cade shouts, 25 coppers? You could do better than that. Tristan Gates says, well, you know, he has 1, but now he can have 1 for a prime blowjob. Tristan Gates says, 25 going twice. Tristan Gates says, sold to Ivar for 25 coppers. You may come collect her by Paul. Eru says, next year I will register. Now I know it's not gold that wins. Tristan Gates says, Paul, careful with this one. Tristan Gates says, don't let her get to close. Cade shouts, I do think the slavers should run these slaves when they have those claims to be sure they're worth the coin paid, Ja? Tristan Gates says, and then finally we have Pinks.
Thought looked up, surely not serious, what a waste, she said with a laugh and moved on down towards Paul. After all, whoever purchased her would have to be down there anyways. Pinks shouts, looks to those she recognizes nearest. She gives a wave and exhales before swallowing thickly as she is called up to the block. She walks confidently, bare feet in soft grass despite the butterflies swirling in her belly. Up the cool stone stairs and onto the block where she displays herself and waits.
Bina says, get another slave?
Tristan Gates says, this one is a fine specimen for 3 to 5 days. Tristan Gates says, she was bred in R. Eru says, I'll take Bina off your hands for once. Now you have the blowjob queen. Tristan Gates says, and trained in dancing, serving, and as a pleasure slave.
Noxie watches Pinks take the stage, cheering her on in silence as she watches on.
Brahms looking left to Mistress Alyssa. Greetings, Mistress, Mother Mistress Rukia. Tristan Gates says, she however has poor sense of direction, so don't be surprised she doesn't quite. Tristan Gates says, coughs. Tristan Gates says, not going to go there. Tristan Gates says, okay, we start at 25 coppers.
Morrigan shouts, HMZZZ, een slaaf Pinks, die naam zegt mijn veel en lacht evil.
Mora Gankelhound says, HMZZZ, a slave Pinks, that name says a lot and laughs evilly.
Pinks flushes as the master speaks of such and leans over briefly to whisper, I stay nice and close so that I do not get lost.
Alyssa eyes Brahms and just points to the ground with a nod.
Thought says, be right back though I need to away from keyboard for a few minutes to cook dinner.
Alyssa says, ground asterisk.
Tristan Gates says, we have a fine slave. Camelus shouts, 30 coppers. Tristan Gates says, 30 coppers. Tristan Gates says, do we have more than 30 coppers?
Morrigan says, 50. Morrigan Calhoun shoot, 50.
Brahms, I keep my gaze lower toward the ground. Cade shouts, grins at the slave on the block. A pleasure slave is well worth whatever you pay for them.
Alyssa says, 1 silver, but I am not registered.
Tristan Gates says, so we have more. Ivar did not expect the slave to sell for such a bargain, though he wouldn't make any complaints over the matter. The slave appeared to be healthy and show well upon the block, walked back up to Paul, and once more began counting out coppers, handing the copper coins over in stacks of 10, the last a half stack. His cool blue gaze sweeping over to the girl. A redhead too, perhaps a real bargain. Tristan Gates says, 30 coppers is going once. Tristan Gates says, 30 coppers going twice. Darius says, wow, 30 is cheap. Tristan Gates says, and sold to Camillus.
Morrigan says, 50 coppers. Morrigan Calhoun shoot, 50 coppers.
Tristan Gates says, you can come collect your slave by Paul.
Pinks lowers her arms, nods briefly to the slaver, and then disappears from the block.
Cade shouts, escorts the slave toward Paul. Tristan Gates says, all right, everyone, that is it for us today. Tristan Gates says, I hope you enjoyed. Tristan Gates says, be safe out there. Don't drink and climb on your Tharlarians.
Morrigan says, OKSIXS for pinks. Morrigan Calhoun shouts, OKSIXS for pinks.
Avon Stormcloud says, why, well done, Tristan and Cade and the slavers. Eru notices the panther sitting next to him and shakes his head with a rueful smile. This fair was a wondrous thing.
Alyssa smiles at Pinks and gives her a hidden wink.
Ron Mag says, we'll be back at Out Tent in a little bit. Rueyu says, finding his leash left dangling, he looks around a bit perturbed, then moves to the commander. Darius says, okay, Mine and Kaylee, you two may say your farewells and go get ready for practice.
Tahenia says, thank you, my master wishes all well.
Morrigan says, host of Korobe Tarn Races, waar moet ik zijn in mijn naam te zeggen dat ik wil racen? Morgankelhound shouts, host of Korobe Tarn Races, where should I go to say my name that I want to race?
Tara says, turns to head back to her stall, gently rocking her lil one.